My name is Charmaine, and I am 35 years old. In front of our closest friends, colleagues, and entire family, my husband grabbed a microphone and gave me an impossible choice. Apologize to his cruel sister for something I did not do or get out of his house. He expected me to shatter. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg for my marriage. But what he did not know was that walking out of those heavy oak doors was not the end of my life. It was the beginning of my revenge. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and my prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and learned a very important lesson. The only way to survive toxic people is to build your own quiet power. That drive led me to become a high-level forensic accountant, specializing in tracking down federal financial fraud. It was a demanding, brilliant career. But to my husband Darren and his image-obsessed family, I was just a boring woman who pushed papers at a desk. The true breaking point of my life happened exactly 3 hours into our 5th wedding anniversary party. We were hosting the event at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a venue Darren insisted on booking to impress his fraternity brothers and business partners. The grand ballroom was breathtaking, draped in thousands of dollars worth of white silk and cascading orchids. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, and waiters circled the room with trays of expensive champagne. I had spent months planning every detail of this evening. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely beautiful. I was wearing a custom-made white silk gown that hugged my figure perfectly. Darren was busy holding court by the massive ice sculpture. He was 35 years old, a regional sales director who loved nothing more than playing the role of the wealthy provider. He thrived on the admiration of others, constantly performing for an audience. He barely looked at me all night, too busy pouring top-shelf liquor for men he wanted to impress. I was standing near the towering champagne fountain, taking a quiet moment to myself, when my sister-in-law, Tasha, approached me. Tasha was 30 years old and proudly called herself a luxury fashion influencer. In reality, she ran a failing boutique that sold overpriced, poorly made clothes, and her entire lavish lifestyle was secretly funded by Darren's constant financial bailouts. Tasha had hated me from the moment Darren introduced us. She despised my quiet confidence, and she especially hated that Darren had married a woman who actually worked for a living instead of relying on family money. Tasha walked up to me holding a brimmed glass of dark red Merlot. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my pristine white dress. A cold, calculated smile spread across her heavily contoured face. "Oh, Charmaine," Tasha purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You really tried tonight, didn't you?" Before I could even respond, Tasha flicked her wrist forward. She tipped the entire glass of dark, heavy wine directly onto the center of my chest. The cold liquid splashed against my collarbone and soaked instantly through the delicate white silk, staining the fabric like a massive blooming wound. It dripped down the front of my gown and splashed onto my expensive shoes. I gasped, completely frozen in shock, but Tasha moved faster than I could process. She dramatically dropped her heavy crystal wine glass onto the marble floor. It shattered into 100 jagged pieces with a loud crash that echoed across the room. Tasha immediately clutched her pearl necklace and threw herself backward, stumbling against a high-top table. Her face contorted into a mask of pure terror. "Oh my God!" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs, forcing fake tears to well up in her eyes. "Charmaine, why would you push me? I was just trying to wish you a happy anniversary. Why are you so aggressive?" The jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation died instantly. The entire ballroom went dead silent, save for the sound of wine dripping from my ruined dress onto the marble floor. Over 200 guests turned around to stare at us. Within seconds, Tasha's husband Jamal rushed through the crowd, and wrapped his arms protectively around his wife. Jamal was a shady real estate broker who always wore flashy suits that were a little too tight. He was a man who survived by riding Darren's coattails. Jamal glared at me as if I were a violent criminal. "Are you crazy?" Jamal shouted, pointing a thick finger directly in my face. "She is wearing 6-inch heels, Charmaine. You could have pushed her right into the glass and seriously injured her. What is wrong with you?" I stood there completely motionless. I had not moved an inch. I had not laid a single finger on her. I looked around the room, waiting for someone, anyone, to point out the obvious truth. I waited for my husband to rush to my side. Instead, my mother-in-law Yvonne pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her heavy, suffocating perfume announced her arrival before she even spoke. Yvonne ignored me completely and went straight to Tasha, rubbing her back and checking her arms for invisible bruises. Once Tasha was safely tucked under her wing, Yvonne turned her furious gaze on me. Her eyes burned with the deep resentment she had harbored for 5 long years. "This is exactly why we did not want Darren marrying a girl like you," Yvonne announced loudly, making sure her voice carried to the back of the room. "You do not know how to act in high society. You have absolutely no class, Charmaine. You never did. You are just jealous of Tasha because she has the natural refinement and beauty that you will never possess. You are a bitter, angry woman." The whispers started. I could hear the wealthy guests murmuring to each other, casting judgmental glances at my stained dress. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain completely neutral. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I looked past Yvonne and Jamal. I looked for Darren, my husband, the man who had stood at an altar and vowed to protect me. Darren was marching across the ballroom, but he was not looking at me with concern. His face was red with embarrassment and fury. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not pull me aside to check on my ruined gown. Instead, Darren walked straight up to the stage and snatched the microphone right out of the lead singer's hand. A sharp screech of feedback echoed through the speakers, making several guests wince. "Everybody listen to me!" Darren's voice boomed through the silent ballroom, dripping with arrogant authority. "I want to make something very clear. This party is on my dime. I paid for this exclusive venue. I paid for the catering, the band, and the open bar." He stepped down from the stage and walked toward me, the microphone still held firmly to his mouth. He pointed his free hand directly at my face. "You do not get to come to an event that I funded and attack my family." Darren said, his voice cold and commanding. "You are my wife, but Tasha is my blood. I will not tolerate this kind of ghetto behavior in front of my colleagues. Apologize to my sister right now, Charmaine. Apologize to her in front of everyone in this room, or get out of my house tonight." The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. 200 pairs of eyes shifted between me and my husband. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the apologies, the desperate pleas of a humiliated wife begging to save her marriage and her lifestyle. I looked at Darren, standing there in his tailored tuxedo, puffing his chest out like a proud king. I looked at Yvonne, who was crossing her arms with a smug, satisfied expression. I looked at Tasha, who was peering out from behind Jamal's shoulder. Tasha was no longer crying. A triumphant, wicked smirk was playing on her lips. She thought she had finally won. I took a slow, deep breath. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached over to my left hand. With deliberate precision, I slid the $30,000 diamond wedding ring off my finger. I walked slowly toward Tasha. Jamal tensed up, ready to block me, but I ignored him. I reached out and took a fresh flute of champagne from a terrified waiter standing nearby. I held the glass up, looked Tasha dead in the eyes, and dropped the heavy diamond ring into the bubbling liquid. It sank to the bottom with a quiet final clink. "Keep the house, Darren," I said clearly, my voice remarkably steady and completely devoid of emotion. I turned my back on my husband, my in-laws, and the entire room of staring guests. I walked toward the grand exit, my head held high, my ruined white silk dress trailing heavily behind me. The doors swung open, and I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. I did not look back. I handed my ticket to the valet who rushed to bring my Mercedes G-Wagon around. I climbed into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back. I pressed the ignition button and the heavy engine roared to life. I felt a strange, overwhelming sense of clarity wash over me. The tears never came. Instead, an intense, quiet focus settled into my bones. Just as I shifted the car into drive, my phone screen lit up brightly on the center console dashboard. It was an automated, high-priority alert from our bank, joint savings account. Withdrawal $250,000, initiated by Darren. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Darren thought he had just won the war by humiliating me and draining our cash. He thought I was just a weak woman who would run away and hide. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed a federal forensic accountant the ultimate smoking gun. I did not drive back to the sprawling house Darren loved to show off. I knew exactly what would be waiting for me there. Empty rooms echoing with the ghosts of a marriage that had always been a performance. Instead, I drove my G-Wagon straight to the underground parking garage of the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown. I parked in the darkest, quietest corner of the concrete structure, turned off the engine, and let the silence of the luxury SUV envelope me. I did not cry. I did not scream or bang my hands against the steering wheel. I simply reached into the back seat and grabbed my heavy leather briefcase. Inside was my encrypted work laptop. Darren and his family had always mocked my career. To them, I was just a corporate drone, a woman who sat in a cubicle crunching numbers and stamping tax forms for mid-level managers. Yvonne used to tell her friends that I was a bookkeeper. She said it with a sneer, implying I was barely one step above a cashier. They had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living. I was a senior forensic accountant for one of the top financial investigative firms in the country. My entire job consisted of hunting down federal financial crimes, dismantling complex money laundering operations, and testifying as an expert witness in high-profile fraud cases. I spent my days tearing apart the carefully constructed financial webs of billionaires and corrupt politicians. I tracked missing millions for a living. A measly $250,000 was child's play. I booted up my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue glow across the dark interior of the car. I logged directly into our joint accounts through my secure administrative portal. The numbers stared back at me in high definition. The savings account we had spent 5 years building, the safety net we had agreed never to touch, was practically empty. Darren had executed an emergency wire transfer exactly 20 minutes ago, right around the time he took the microphone to humiliate me. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. I pulled the routing numbers and traced the destination of the wire. Darren thought he was clever by sending the money through a secondary holding account, but he left a digital trail so wide a rookie could have followed it. It took me less than 10 minutes to find where the money landed. It had bypassed all of Darren's personal accounts and dropped straight into a commercial business account. The name on the account made my blood run cold, and then it made me smile. Luxe, by Tasha. Tasha had launched her luxury fashion boutique 2 years ago with massive fanfare. She hosted red carpet events, paid minor celebrities to wear her clothes, and constantly posted photos of herself flying first class to Paris for Fashion Week. Darren bragged to anyone who would listen that his little sister was a self-made millionaire. But as I pulled up the public financial records and cross-referenced them with the banking data, I had access to the glamorous illusion completely evaporated. Luxe by Tasha was not a multi-million-dollar empire. It was a sinking ship on fire. The boutique was severely underwater, drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Tasha had taken out high-interest loans to pay for her extravagant lifestyle and maintain the facade of a successful influencer. She was paying off old debt with new debt, a classic Ponzi scheme of personal finance. Suppliers had placed liens against her inventory. The commercial landlord of her flagship store was preparing eviction notices for unpaid rent. She was financially ruined. And Darren, the golden boy, who always had to be the hero for his family, had just stolen my life savings to bail out his spoiled sister's fake empire. My phone vibrated violently against the center console. The caller ID flashed with Darren's name. I let it ring 3 times before picking it up. I did not say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. "Are you done throwing your little temper tantrum?" Darren asked. His voice was thick with arrogance and alcohol. "I expected you to be waiting outside the venue begging to come back in. You really embarrassed yourself tonight, Charmaine. Everyone is talking about how unstable you are." I leaned back against the leather seat staring at the financial records glowing on my laptop screen. "I am perfectly stable, Darren, and I am not coming back to the party, or the house." He let out a short, harsh bark of a laugh. "Oh, really? You think you can just walk away from me? Let me remind you who pays for the lifestyle you enjoy. You think you are so independent with your boring little office job? We will see how independent you feel tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow, Darren?" I asked, keeping my tone completely flat and unbothered. "Since you decided to walk out on me and disrespect my family, I am cutting you off," he declared, sounding incredibly pleased with himself. "I am calling the bank first thing in the morning. I am canceling every single credit card in your wallet. The platinum card, the black card, all of them. Let us see how long you survive out there without my name backing you up." I closed my eyes for a brief second, savoring the sheer breathtaking magnitude of his ignorance. Darren genuinely believed he held all the power. He had lived in his own delusion for so long that he forgot the basic facts of our reality. I opened my eyes and let out a genuine, joyful laugh. It echoed loudly in the quiet car. Darren stopped breathing on the other end of the line. "You mean the credit card's tied directly to my social security number?" I asked, my voice suddenly sharp and dangerous. "The accounts where I am the primary cardholder and you are just an authorized user. You want to cut those off? Please do. Because the only reason you even have a platinum card in your wallet is because my credit score has been keeping you afloat for the last 3 years." "What are you talking about?" Darren snapped, his voice faltering slightly. "My credit is flawless. Your credit has been in the gutter ever since you secretly financed Jamal's failed real estate flips 2 years ago," I fired back, dropping the hammer. "Oh, did you think I did not know about that? Jamal convinced you to co-sign on those dilapidated properties on the east side. When he could not flip them, you took the massive hit to keep Yvonne from finding out her precious son-in-law was a fraud. You have a mountain of defaulted loans in your name, Darren. If you call the bank to cancel my cards, they are going to demand you surrender yours immediately. So go ahead, cut them off. Let us see who starves first." I hung up the phone before he could stammer out a reply. I blocked his number, turned off my phone, and grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk. I walked into the Grand Meridian, booked their finest executive suite, and paid for it up front with the very credit card he just threatened to cancel. I took a long, hot shower, washing the smell of cheap Merlot and toxic family dynamics down the drain. I slept better that night than I had in 5 long years. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of room service delivering fresh coffee and a platter of fruit. I felt completely rejuvenated. I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window sipping my espresso and watching the city wake up when a sharp knock echoed through the suite. It was too aggressive to be housekeeping. I tightened the belt of my plush white hotel robe and walked to the door. I checked the peephole. A stern-looking man in a cheap suit was standing in the hallway, holding a thick manila envelope. I opened the door. "Charmaine Brooks?" he asked, looking at a clipboard. "Yes," I replied, already knowing exactly what this was. "You have been served," he said bluntly. He shoved the heavy envelope into my hands, turned on his heel, and walked quickly down the carpeted hallway. I closed the door and walked over to the glass dining table. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. Darren had not wasted a single second. While I was sleeping comfortably, he had been frantically calling his aggressive lawyers. He had filed for divorce first thing this morning. But it was not just a standard divorce petition. I flipped to the second page and read the demands. Darren was claiming that I had emotionally abandoned the marriage and intentionally sabotaged his professional reputation at a highly public event. Because of this alleged sabotage, he was demanding that I leave the marriage with absolutely nothing. He wanted the house, the cars, and the remaining assets to be awarded to him entirely. And then I saw the final clause buried at the bottom of page 4. My eyes went wide, and I actually had to read it twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. Darren was demanding full permanent spousal alimony from me. He claimed that he had sacrificed his own career advancement to support my basic office job and that he was entitled to a portion of my future earnings to maintain the lifestyle he was accustomed to. He also demanded that I pay all of Tasha's medical bills for the severe emotional distress I supposedly caused her at the party. Darren had fired the first legal shot. He thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought these intimidating legal threats would force me to crawl back, apologize to his sister, and accept my place at the bottom of his family's hierarchy. He wanted to drain me dry and leave me with nothing but a ruined reputation. I picked up my phone, but I did not call Darren. I did not call Yvonne to plead my case. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the number of the most ruthless family law attorney in the state, a woman who had a reputation for completely dismantling arrogant men in court. Darren wanted a war over finances. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman who commanded the financial battlefield for a living. I looked back down at the divorce papers resting on the glass table. The audacity of demanding spousal support while secretly funneling my life savings to his sister was breathtaking. I reached for my laptop again. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to dig into the real estate records and see exactly how much damage Darren and Jamal had truly done. If they wanted to play dirty with money, I was going to show them what a professional audit really looked like. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple beige blazer and slacks that screamed mid-level corporate employee. I bypassed my firm's sleek, high-security glass tower in the financial district. Instead, I drove my G-Wagon out to the suburbs and parked behind a rundown strip mall next to a discount dry cleaner. This was my decoy office. It was a small, unassuming satellite branch my firm maintained strictly for low-income tax prep walk-ins during the busy season. It had flickering fluorescent lights, faded gray commercial carpet, and a perpetually broken coffee machine in the corner. I rarely worked from here, but it was the official address Darren had on file for my workplace. For 5 years. He had believed I sat at one of these cheap particle board desks crunching basic numbers. Today that illusion was going to serve as my perfect cover. I unlocked the front door, flipped on the harsh overhead lights, and sat down at the front reception desk. I did not have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the cheap brass bell above the glass door chimed aggressively. Darren strutted into the small office like he was stepping onto a yacht. He was wearing a tailored navy suit and his favorite designer sunglasses, which he slowly took off and folded into his breast pocket. Right behind him was Jamal wearing an absurdly tight gray plaid suit and a flashy gold watch that I knew for a fact was a cheap replica. Jamal looked around the dingy office with an exaggerated expression of disgust, wiping his finger along the top of a dusty filing cabinet. "So this is the command center." Darren mocked, his voice dripping with condescension as he stopped in front of my desk. "I always knew your job was pathetic, Charmaine, but this place actually depresses me. It smells like desperation and cheap ink." I folded my hands neatly on the desk and looked up at him. "What do you want, Darren?" Darren slammed a duplicate copy of the divorce petition onto my desk. The thick stack of papers landed with a heavy thud. He leaned forward, planting both hands on the edge of my desk, trying to physically intimidate me. "I came here to give you some friendly advice," Darren said, flashing a shark-like smile. "You read the papers this morning. You know exactly what my lawyers are demanding. I suggest you sign the uncontested waiver and agree to my terms immediately. If you try to fight me in court, I will drag this out until you are completely bankrupt. I will bury you in legal fees until you have to sell that overpriced car of yours just to afford a studio apartment." Jamal chuckled from the corner, crossing his arms and leaning against the cheap wood paneling of the wall. "Listen to him, Charmaine. Darren holds all the cards here. I am already working with him to appraise the estate. The house, the cars, the investments, he owns the estate. You walked out. You abandoned the marriage. The judge is going to give him everything, and you are going to leave with absolutely nothing. You might as well save yourself the embarrassment." I looked at Jamal, taking in his smug, greasy demeanor. "You are appraising the estate, Jamal? That is interesting." I thought your real estate brokerage license was under review after you failed to disclose that severe foundation damage on the West Side property last year. Jamal's smug smile instantly vanished. His jaw tightened and he stood up straight. You better watch your mouth, Charmaine. You do not know anything about my business. I know enough to know that you are the last person who should be giving financial advice, I replied calmly. Darren slammed his hand on the desk again loudly enough to make the plastic pen cup rattle. Stop deflecting, Charmaine. This is not about Jamal. This is about you finally learning your place. You embarrassed my family. You disrespected my sister. Now you are going to pay the price. You are not going to touch a single dime of my money, and you are never stepping foot in my house again. Sign the papers by Friday, or my lawyers will move for an emergency hearing. He stood up, adjusted his silk tie, and looked around the small office one last time with a look of pure pity. Is this where you plan to sleep when the hotel kicks you out? Because with your salary, you will not be able to afford the Meridian for much longer. Let us go, Jamal. The air in here is making me sick. They turned and walked out the door, chiming loudly behind them. I watched through the front window as they got into Darren's luxury sedan, high-fiving each other over the center console before speeding out of the parking lot. They genuinely believed they had just put me in my place. They thought they had terrified the quiet, submissive bookkeeper into total surrender. I waited until their car disappeared from view. Then I walked over to the front door, locked the deadbolt, and flipped the open sign to closed. I pulled down the cheap plastic blinds, plunging the room into shadows save for the glow of my computer screen. I walked back to my desk, pushed the divorce papers straight into the trash can, and opened my encrypted laptop. Darren loved to use the phrase "my house." He loved to weaponize the property we lived in, constantly reminding me that he was the one who put down the initial deposit right before we got married. He loved the power trip of holding the deed over my head. But as a forensic accountant, I knew that people lie, but property records never do. It was time to conduct a full counter-investigation into the estate he was so desperately trying to protect. I bypassed the standard commercial software and booted up my secure access portal, logging directly into the county property registry and the federal banking database. The system required a dual-factor biometric authentication. Once I was in, I had unfiltered access to every lien transfer deed and financial instrument attached to any property in the state. I typed in the address of our marital home, a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial in the most expensive neighborhood in the county. The initial deed pulled up immediately. It showed exactly what I expected. The house was purchased 5 years ago, and both of our names were legally recorded on the title. Regardless of who paid the deposit, I was an equal owner in the eyes of the state. But I did not stop there. I clicked on the Financial History tab, digging into the encumbrances and liens attached to the property. I scrolled past our primary mortgage with the National Bank, noting the steadily decreasing principal balance. Everything looked completely normal until I hit the transactions from exactly 3 months ago. My fingers stopped moving over the trackpad. A cold, sharp rush of adrenaline spiked through my chest. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the harsh black text of the newly recorded document. There was a second mortgage attached to the house, a massive home equity line of credit that had been fully drawn and converted into a cash loan. The amount was staggering. $500,000. $500,000 had been borrowed against the equity of the house. I traced the origination details. The loan was entirely facilitated and brokered by a third-party agency. I looked at the name of the brokerage listed in the filing. Jamal Real Estate Holdings, LLC. Jamal had brokered the loan and collected a massive commission fee for pushing the paperwork through an unregulated subprime lender. And I knew exactly where that $500,000 went. It had been funneled straight into Tasha's failing boutique to keep her fake influencer lifestyle afloat. My mind raced through the legal implications. In our state, you cannot take out a second mortgage on a jointly owned marital home without the explicit documented consent of both spouses. It requires a spousal consent form, a legally binding document that acknowledges the debt and waives any claim against the lender if the property is foreclosed upon. I clicked on the attached PDF files, pulling up the digitized scan of the final closing documents. I scrolled through the pages of dense legal jargon until I reached the final signature page. There on the bottom right corner was my name, Charmaine Brooks. I stared at the signature. It was a sloppy, hurried forgery. The slant of the letters was entirely wrong. The pressure of the pen strokes was too heavy. Darren had not even tried to make it look authentic. He had just scribbled my name to get his hands on the cash. A forged signature on a federal banking document is wire fraud. It is a severe felony. But as I looked at the document, a darker realization hit me. A bank does not accept a multi-$100,000 loan document just because a signature is present. The signature has to be legally verified. It must be witnessed and stamped by a licensed notary public, a state official who swears under penalty of perjury that they checked the identification of the signer and watched them sign the document in person. I scrolled down just an inch further. Right next to my forged signature was a circular blue ink stamp, the official seal of a registered notary public. I zoomed in on the stamp. The text was crystal clear. It read, Yvonne Miller, commission expires 2028. My breath caught in my throat. My mother-in-law. Yvonne was a retired municipal clerk who had kept her notary license active to make extra money doing closing documents for Jamal's shady real estate deals. The scope of their betrayal was absolutely breathtaking. Darren had forged my signature. Jamal had brokered the fraudulent loan to get a commission. Yvonne had illegally notarized a forged document to bypass the bank's security, and Tasha had received the stolen funds. The entire family had conspired together to commit federal mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and notary fraud. They had literally stolen the roof over my head to fund Tasha's delusions of grandeur. But the final nail in their coffin was waiting for me on the next tab. I pulled up the payment history for the fraudulent second mortgage. The subprime lender charged an astronomical interest rate. The monthly payment was over $4,000. Darren had not made a single payment. The loan was exactly 90 days past due. A bright red banner flashed across the top of the banking portal. Notice of default issued. The lender had already filed the preliminary paperwork to initiate a hostile foreclosure. The house Darren loved so much, the house he had so proudly ordered me out of the night before, was slipping through his fingers. He was completely broke, drowning in illegal debt, and heading straight for a catastrophic financial collapse. I sat back in my cheap office chair and let out a long, slow breath. The sheer arrogance of these people was going to be their ultimate downfall. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, uneducated woman they could bully and discard. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded gun to a woman who knew exactly how to pull the trigger. My phone rang on Thursday afternoon. The caller ID displayed Yvonne's name. I let it ring twice before answering immediately, pressing the record button on my secondary work phone. Yvonne's voice floated through the speaker, thick with the fake syrupy sweetness she reserved for her church friends and people she was preparing to backstab. Charmaine's sweetheart, Yvonne cooed into the receiver. The Lord has placed it heavy on my heart to reach out to you today. Families fight. The devil tries to divide us, but we are supposed to forgive. Darren is hurting so much, and I know you are hurting too. I am cooking my famous smothered chicken and baked macaroni and cheese this Sunday. Please come over to the house after service. Let us break bread together, pray on this broken marriage, and make peace like civilized adults. I knew exactly what this was. It was absolutely not an olive branch. It was a calculated ambush. They had realized their aggressive legal intimidation tactics at my decoy office had not broken me into submission, so they were pivoting to emotional manipulation. I kept my voice perfectly flat. I will be there at 2:00, Yvonne. I spent the weekend finalizing my financial dossier. By Sunday afternoon, I was ready for war. I dressed carefully, choosing a tailored crimson dress that exuded absolute confidence, and paired it with my expensive designer heels. I clipped a tiny high-definition micro-recorder to the inside lining of my handbag, ensuring it was actively recording. I drove my G-Wagon back to the luxurious suburban house I technically still owned half of. Darren's sleek luxury sedan and Jamal's oversized truck were parked aggressively in the circular driveway. I walked up the manicured stone path, took a deep, steadying breath, and pushed the heavy mahogany front door open. I did not bother knocking. After all, Darren had legally declared it was his house. But my name was still firmly printed on the original deed. The rich smell of seasoned poultry and baked cheese hit me instantly, wafting from the kitchen. The entire family was already sitting around the massive custom dining table. Darren sat arrogantly at the head of the table like a king holding court. Yvonne sat immediately to his right, while Tasha and Jamal occupied the seats across from her. The single empty chair at the opposite end of the long table was clearly meant for me, positioning me perfectly as the isolated target of their collective interrogation. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Tasha muttered violently, stabbing a piece of sweet cornbread with her silver fork. She was wearing a stunning designer silk blouse that I now knew with absolute certainty was paid for with the stolen equity from my home. "Hush now," Tasha Yvonne said, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch for the invisible audience she imagined watching her. "Let us have a peaceful, blessed meal. Sit down, Charmaine. I fixed you a beautiful plate." I walked over to the empty chair and sat down, but I did not touch the steaming food sitting on the china plate in front of me. I folded my hands neatly on the polished mahogany surface, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and looked directly down the table at Darren. "Let us skip the fake prayers and the forced pleasantries," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large dining room. "Why did you really invite me here today?" Darren sighed heavily, putting down his fork and deliberately wiping his mouth with a crisp white linen napkin. He leaned back in his chair and adopted a look of weary magnanimity, playing the exhausted husband, trying to be reasonable with a hysterical wife. "Look," Charmaine Darren began using a patronizing tone. "We got off on the wrong foot the other day. Jamal and I came at you a little hard at your office, and I apologize if you felt threatened. Divorce is an incredibly ugly process, and I do not want to see you financially destroyed. I know you do not have the resources on your meager salary to fight my aggressive legal team. I want to be generous and handle this quietly." Darren reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a thick, folded legal document, and slid it forcefully down the length of the polished table. The heavy paper stopped right in front of my untouched dinner plate. "It is a post-nuptial settlement agreement," Darren explained, intertwining his fingers and resting them on his stomach. "If you sign it right now, we can completely skip the messy public court battle. You officially waive all legal claims to this house, both of my luxury cars and my retirement investment accounts. In exchange for your cooperation, I will cut you a certified cashier's check for $10,000 today. You can use that cash to get a decent little apartment on your side of town and start fresh without carrying any of my debt." I looked down at the document without touching it. I noticed a second page attached to the back. "And exactly what is the non-disclosure agreement for?" I asked, flipping the page over with my index finger to read the bold print at the top. Jamal cleared his throat loudly, leaning forward with his thick elbows planted firmly on the table, trying to look intimidating. "That is just standard corporate procedure," Charmaine Jamal said smoothly. "It states that you will absolutely not discuss Tasha's luxury boutique, my private real estate business, or any details regarding Darren's personal finances with anyone, including lawyers or the press. You sign the paper, take the 10 grand, and keep your mouth shut permanently." Everyone walks away, happy and unharmed. Yvonne reached across the table and patted my hand with her cold, clammy fingers, smiling sweetly. "Take the blessing, child. You know you have no legitimate claim to the wealth this family built. $10,000 is a huge amount of money for a single woman. Honestly, it is significantly more money than your people have ever seen at one time. Take the check. Be grateful for what Darren is offering and go start over with your own kind." I stared at Yvonne's hand resting on mine. I felt a surge of absolute disgust, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I slowly pulled my hand away from her grip, picked up the insulting settlement agreement, and slid it right back down the table toward Darren. "I do not need $10,000, Yvonne," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. "But Tasha sure needs $150,000 to immediately pay off her federal tax liens, doesn't she?" The entire dining room instantly froze in time. Tasha's silver fork stopped hovering halfway to her open mouth. Darren sat up bone straight, his arrogant, relaxed posture completely vanishing in a millisecond. "What did you just say?" Tasha whispered, her heavily contoured face rapidly draining of all its color. I said you owe the federal government exactly $150,000 in unpaid back taxes. I repeated loudly and clearly, ensuring the micro recorder hidden in my purse captured every single syllable of the confrontation. I also know for a fact that your commercial landlord is actively drafting eviction papers because you are currently 4 months behind on your storefront rent. Your glamorous luxury boutique is a total financial fraud, Tasha. You are completely and utterly broke. Shut up, Darren shouted violently, slamming his clenched fist onto the table, making the crystal water glasses rattle dangerously. You do not know what the hell you are talking about. You are just a glorified secretary who pushes paper around a cheap desk all day. I smiled a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile that made Darren visibly flinch backward in his chair. I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government, Darren. I track complex financial fraud and money laundering operations for a living, which is exactly how I know everything about the illegal $500,000 secondary mortgage you secretly took out on this house exactly 3 months ago. The fraudulent mortgage you took out using my forged signature to quietly bail out Tasha's massive failing business. The silence that followed my revelation was completely deafening. Yvonne's face turned a sickly, horrifying shade of pale gray. Jamal swallowed incredibly hard, his prominent Adam's apple bobbing nervously against the tight collar of his dress shirt. They realized instantly that the helpless, uneducated woman they thought they were bullying had systematically dismantled their entire criminal conspiracy. Tasha was the first one to suddenly snap under the immense pressure. She let out an ear-piercing scream, grabbed her heavy dinner plate full of food, and hurled it across the dining table. It smashed violently against the expensive wallpaper, sending smothered chicken macaroni and sharp, shattered pottery flying everywhere across the room. "You miserable, vindictive witch!" Tasha shrieked hysterically, hot tears of pure, unadulterated rage streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You have always been insanely jealous of my success. You are trying to purposefully ruin my entire life." Jamal immediately jumped up from his chair in a blind panic, sending his heavy wooden chair crashing violently backward onto the polished hardwood floor. He puffed out his broad chest and marched directly toward me, pointing a thick, aggressive finger mere inches from my face. "Listen to me very carefully, you little nobody," Jamal growled, his face turning red with fury. "You have absolutely no solid proof of anything you just said. I will personally ruin you in this city. I will use every connection I have to make sure you never work in the accounting industry ever again. I will bury you so deep in legal trouble you will never see daylight." I stood up slowly, completely and totally unbothered by his pathetic, empty threats. I gracefully picked up my expensive designer handbag, adjusting the leather strap comfortably on my shoulder. I looked straight past Jamal's angry face and locked eyes directly with my mother-in-law, who was currently trembling violently in her seat, clutching her pearl necklace in absolute terror. "You cannot bury someone who already owns all the shovels, Jamal," I said calmly and confidently. I turned around and began walking deliberately toward the grand front door. "Oh, and Yvonne!" I paused with my hand firmly gripping the brass doorknob, looking back over my shoulder one final time at the shattered remnants of their fake perfect family. "I will be sending a highly detailed email directly to the state notary board first thing tomorrow morning. I think the state investigators will be very interested to see exactly which fraudulent banking documents your official blue stamp ended up on. Have an absolutely lovely Sunday evening, everyone." I walked out to my car with my head held high, the sound of Tasha sobbing hysterically fading behind the heavy mahogany door. I climbed into my G-Wagon, locked the doors, and finally let out a genuine, relaxed exhale. The bomb had been successfully dropped. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. But I knew these people intimately. They were narcissists backed into a corner, and cornered rats always try to bite. I fully expected them to retaliate. I just did not expect them to be so incredibly stupid about it. By Monday morning, Jamal made his first desperate move. He knew I was a massive threat, but he still foolishly believed I was nothing more than a low-level strip mall bookkeeper. He thought he could easily destroy my professional credibility before I had the chance to expose his fraudulent mortgage scheme. Jamal had a corrupt buddy who worked as a mid-level administrator at the state accountancy board. Using that connection, Jamal filed an expedited, completely fabricated ethics complaint against my certified public accountant license. I was sitting in my hotel suite sipping black coffee when the automated email notification from the state board hit my inbox. I opened the attached PDF and read through Jamal's ridiculous allegations. He claimed that I had been secretly moonlighting as a freelance accountant for his real estate brokerage. He submitted forged ledger pages, alleging that I had embezzled $30,000 from his client escrow accounts over the past year. He demanded an immediate suspension of my license and threatened criminal charges. It was a classic smear tactic. He wanted to tie me up in bureaucratic red tape and destroy my sole source of income so I would be forced to crawl back to Darren and beg for that pathetic $10,000 settlement. While I was reading through Jamal's poorly written complaint, my personal phone buzzed. A friend from college had sent me a screen recording of an Instagram live video with a simple text message asking if I was okay. I clicked the video. It was Tasha. Tasha had set up her ring light in her lavish, fraudulently funded living room. She was wearing an oversized designer sweater, her hair intentionally messy, completely devoid of her usual heavy makeup to make herself look pale and vulnerable. She was broadcasting live to her 100,000 followers. A follower count I knew for a fact was mostly purchased bots and fake accounts. "Hey guys," Tasha said to the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "I'm sorry to come on here looking like this, but my family is going through a really dark time right now and I just need to speak my truth before the rumors get out of hand." She paused, wiping away a fake tear with the sleeve of her expensive sweater. "As many of you know, my brother Darren has been married to a woman who we always tried to welcome with open arms. But behind closed doors, she has been emotionally abusive and incredibly toxic. At their anniversary party this weekend, she became completely unhinged. She physically attacked me, threw her drink on herself to play the victim, and demanded that my brother choose between his own flesh and blood or her. When he stood up for me, she walked out. And now this gold-digging woman is trying to extort our wealthy family for hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund her lifestyle." Tasha let out a dramatic, breathy sob, covering her face with her hands. "Please keep my brother in your prayers. He is completely devastated. He just wanted to be a good husband, and she is trying to destroy his life." I closed out of the video and opened a different app. Sure enough, Darren had already downloaded the broadcast and shared it across his own social media profiles, including his professional LinkedIn page. He added a long, self-righteous caption about how painful it is to realize the woman you love only wanted your money, and how he was focusing on protecting his sister and healing his family. He was solidifying his role as the wealthy, victimized husband. He was rallying their social circle, preparing to socially isolate me and ruin my reputation in our city. I did not leave a comment. I did not post a frantic rebuttal defending myself. I simply screen-recorded Tasha's video, took screenshots of Darren's posts, and forwarded all the evidence directly to my ruthless divorce attorney. Every single lie they posted online was just adding another zero to the defamation and perjury charges I was carefully building against them. I finished my coffee, changed into a sharp charcoal gray power suit, and left the hotel. I did not drive to the dingy strip mall decoy office today. I drove straight into the heart of the downtown financial district. I pulled my vehicle into the secure underground parking garage of a towering 60-story glass skyscraper. I took the private executive elevator all the way up to the 45th floor. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing the sleek, modern lobby of one of the most prestigious financial investigative firms on the entire East Coast. The firm's logo was etched into a massive slab of white marble behind the reception desk. This was my real office. This was the command center Darren and Jamal had absolutely no idea existed. I walked past a dozen junior analysts who nodded respectfully in my direction. Before I could even reach my corner office, my desk phone rang. It was the executive assistant for Richard Sterling, the senior managing partner of the firm. Richard was a former federal prosecutor who did not tolerate nonsense from anyone. His assistant told me Richard needed to see me in the main glass-walled boardroom immediately. I grabbed my legal pad and walked down the long carpeted hallway. The boardroom was massive, featuring a long mahogany table surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city skyline. Richard was sitting at the head of the table wearing a crisp white shirt with his sleeves rolled up. A thick, ominous-looking manila folder rested on the table in front of him. Right next to it was a single sheet of paper bearing the official seal of the State Accountancy Board. "Good morning, Charmaine," Richard said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Take a seat." I sat down in the leather chair directly across from him. "I see the State Board sent over the complaint," I said, calmly, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Richard picked up the single sheet of paper and looked at it with an expression of profound amusement. "Yes. It seems a local real estate broker named Jamal has accused our top forensic auditor of embezzling $30,000 from his strip mall brokerage. He also requested an emergency suspension of your license. It is a completely fabricated retaliation tactic," Richard first explained, maintaining total professional composure. "I have never done a single hour of bookkeeping for his firm. He is my brother-in-law. I recently uncovered evidence that he conspired with my husband to forge my signature on a $500,000 secondary mortgage. He is trying to discredit me before I can officially report the fraud." Richard let out a low chuckle and tossed the fake ethics complaint directly into the trash can beside his desk. "I am well aware it is fake, Charmaine. The board director called me personally this morning. He thought it was hilarious that a two-bit local broker was trying to take down the woman who just testified before Congress on international wire fraud." Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. The amusement faded from his eyes, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a seasoned investigator. "But Jamal's little stunt triggered a routine background scan in our federal database. And what the system spit back this morning is a lot bigger than a single forged residential mortgage." Richard reached out and placed his hand heavily on the thick manila folder resting on the table. He slowly slid the massive federal file across the smooth wood until it stopped right in front of me. I looked down at the label stamped in bold red ink across the top of the folder. "Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The IRS just flagged Jamal's real estate firm," Richard said, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone. "Over the past 2 years, during the height of the pandemic, Jamal set up a dozen fake shell companies, claiming to have hundreds of employees. He applied for and received millions of dollars in federal COVID Paycheck Protection Program loans. He took taxpayer money meant to save struggling businesses and funneled it directly into his personal accounts, his residential flips, and a failing retail boutique owned by his wife." I stared at the federal seal on the folder. Tasha's boutique. Jamal had not just used the stolen mortgage money to fund Tasha's fake influencer lifestyle. He had used millions in stolen federal relief funds. "The Department of Justice is preparing to drop a massive hammer on his entire operation," Richard continued, leaning back in his chair. "But Jamal moved the money through a very complex web of offshore holding accounts and crypto exchanges. The federal prosecutors need the financial web completely untangled before they can issue the arrest warrants. They need an outside forensic auditor. They need our absolute best person to tear his company apart piece by piece and trace every single stolen dollar." Richard looked at me, a dangerous, knowing smile playing on the corners of his mouth. "Since you are already intimately familiar with the players involved, the lead prosecutor specifically requested that we assign this to you. But I know this is your family, Charmaine. If it is too close to home, or if it violates a personal boundary, I can assign it to another partner. So, I am asking you directly, do you want the case?" I looked down at the massive federal file containing the absolute destruction of the men who had spent 5 years trying to make me feel small. I thought about Darren telling me to get out of his house. I thought about Jamal threatening to ruin me in this city. I thought about Tasha crying fake tears to her internet followers, calling me a gold digger while secretly spending millions of stolen federal dollars. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the heavy manila folder, feeling the weight of the evidence beneath my palm. I looked up at Richard and I smiled. "I will need a red pen." I left Richard's office with the massive federal file tucked securely under my arm. I did not return to the dingy strip mall decoy office. I went straight back to my executive suite at the Grand Meridian and transformed the luxurious living area into a high-security war room. I ordered room service, pushed the expensive floral centerpieces off the heavy glass dining table, and began unpacking the financial destruction of Jamal and Tasha. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I lived on black espresso and the pure, unadulterated thrill of the hunt. Jamal had been incredibly greedy, but he was also remarkably sloppy. He had registered 6 different limited liability companies, using the home addresses of his elderly relatives. During the peak of the pandemic, he submitted falsified payroll documents claiming these shell companies employed over 200 people. He applied for and received $3.5 million in federal relief funds. But instead of paying phantom employees, Jamal routed the money through a series of local credit unions, eventually consolidating the stolen taxpayer funds into his primary real estate brokerage account. From there, he siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into Lux by Tasha to pay for her designer inventory and her flashy storefront rent. I traced every single digital footprint. I matched routing numbers, cross-referenced forged tax identification numbers, and highlighted every illegal transfer with a bright red pen. By Wednesday morning, I had constructed an airtight, irrefutable map of their entire criminal enterprise. I was just compiling the final evidentiary appendix when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through my suite. It was not room service, it was the heavy, rhythmic knock of law enforcement. I tightened the belt of my robe, walked to the door, and checked the peephole. Standing in the carpeted hallway was the general manager of the hotel, looking incredibly distressed. Flanking him were 2 uniformed city police officers, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. I opened the door, my expression perfectly calm. "May I help you, officers?" Charmaine Brooks, the taller officer, asked, stepping forward slightly. "We need you to step out into the hallway, please. We received a direct dispatch regarding a priority theft of high-value property. We need you to come down to the lobby with us immediately." I did not panic. I did not ask what was going on. I already knew exactly who was behind this pathetic stunt. "Give me exactly 3 minutes to get dressed," I said smoothly. I left the door open so they could see I was not destroying evidence, walked into the bedroom, and changed into a sharp navy blue tailored suit. I slipped on my heels, grabbed my leather handbag, and walked back out. The hotel manager looked deeply apologetic, clearly hating the disruption in his luxury establishment, but I just offered him a reassuring smile. We rode the glass elevator down to the ground floor in complete silence. The doors slid open to reveal the opulent, marble-floored lobby of the Grand Meridian. It was the busy morning rush. Wealthy guests were sipping artisanal coffees, businessmen were reading the financial papers, and bellhops were pushing brass luggage carts. And right there, sitting dead center on a plush velvet sofa like they owned the entire building, were Darren and Jamal. Darren was wearing a casual but expensive cashmere sweater, his legs crossed arrogantly at the knee. He had a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. Jamal stood right behind him, holding a paper coffee cup, practically vibrating with excited anticipation. They had come to watch the show. They wanted to see the quiet, submissive woman they despised get publicly humiliated and dragged out of a luxury hotel in shiny steel handcuffs. "There she is," Darren said loudly, standing up and pointing a dramatic finger right at me as the officers escorted me across the lobby. "That is the woman. She is my estranged wife. Officer, I want her arrested right now, and I want her hotel room completely tossed." "Keep your voice down, sir," the taller officer instructed firmly, turning to face Darren. "Now, you stated on the emergency dispatch call that a grand larceny had occurred. Please verify exactly what you are claiming was stolen from your residence." Darren puffed his chest out, playing the role of the deeply violated victim for the growing crowd of whispering onlookers. "When she abandoned our marriage and stormed out of my house this weekend, she took my grandfather's vintage platinum Patek Philippe watch. It is a family heirloom, strictly appraised at $50,000. I noticed it was missing from my personal safe this morning. She is broke. She has no money to pay for a luxury suite like this, and she obviously stole my property to pawn it. I am pressing full criminal charges." Jamal nodded vigorously in agreement, trying to look incredibly serious. "She has been acting completely erratic, officer. Unstable. We tried to offer her a generous settlement just to go away quietly, but she is trying to extort the family. You need to put her in cuffs before she tries to run." I stood there, my hands clasped elegantly in front of me, listening to their absurd fabricated narrative. Darren was pulling a classic power trip. He knew I did not have the watch. He just wanted to use the police as a weapon to terrify me, ruin my reputation at the hotel, and force me to submit to his divorce demands out of pure fear. The officer turned back to me, pulling out a small black notepad. "Ma'am, do you have the watch in your possession, or do you know where it is?" I looked the officer dead in the eye. "I do not have his watch. I have never had the code to his personal safe. When I left the country club on Saturday night, I came directly to this hotel. I arrived with a single overnight bag. I have not stepped foot on his property since the anniversary party. If you would like, you can request the hotel manager right here to pull the security footage of my arrival. You will see I brought nothing with me but my purse and a laptop bag. Furthermore, I am a fully employed federal financial contractor. I paid for this suite up front using my own platinum credit card. I do not need to pawn imaginary watches to afford my life." Darren scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. "She is lying. She is a low-level bookkeeper. Check her room. I demand you go up there and search her belongings." The officer let out a long, exhausted sigh. The initial adrenaline of the call was completely fading, replaced by the profound irritation of a cop realizing he was being used in a messy domestic dispute. "Sir, without a warrant or probable cause, I cannot search her hotel room, and based on the hotel's secure access logs and her verified alibi, there is absolutely zero evidence placing her at the scene of the alleged theft." Darren's smug grin instantly vanished. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "What do you mean, zero evidence? I am telling you she took it. I am the victim here. You are just going to let a thief walk away." The second officer stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on his radio. "Sir, I am going to advise you to tread very carefully right now. If we investigate this and find that watch sitting in your house, or if we discover you pawned it yourself, you will be formally charged with filing a false police report. That is a Class B misdemeanor and it carries jail time. Are you absolutely certain you want us to open a formal detective inquiry into your household assets?" Darren swallowed hard. The arrogant bluster completely deflated from his chest. He suddenly realized the legal trap he had almost walked blindly into. He glanced nervously at Jamal, who suddenly looked very interested in the plastic lid of his coffee cup. "Never mind," Darren muttered, waving his hand dismissively and taking a step back. "Forget it, I will let my divorce attorneys handle her." "Let's get out of here, Jamal. This is a complete waste of my time." Darren turned to walk toward the grand revolving doors of the hotel lobby. He thought he could just launch a grenade and casually walk away when it failed to detonate. He thought the confrontation was over, but it had not even started. Just as Darren and Jamal took their first steps toward the exit, the heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open automatically. Two tall men wearing sharp dark suits walked in. They moved with a distinct synchronized purpose that instantly commanded the attention of the room. They bypassed the reception desk. They bypassed the bellhops. They walked with absolute authority, their eyes scanning the lobby until they locked onto our small group. Darren saw them approaching and immediately puffed his chest back out, a triumphant smile returning to his face. He actually thought the local officers had called for backup. He thought his wealthy status had commanded plainclothes detectives to arrive and arrest me. "You see," Darren sneered, looking over his shoulder at me. "Now the real professionals are here. You are done, Charmaine." The two men stopped right in front of the local police officers. The lead man reached into his breast pocket and smoothly pulled out a leather badge wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a heavy gold shield. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The man stated, his voice carrying the cold, hard edge of absolute authority. "We are assisting the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." The local officers immediately stepped back, nodding respectfully and giving the federal agents a wide berth. Darren crossed his arms, looking at me with pure venom, waiting for them to read me my rights. But the federal agents did not even look at me. They walked right past me. They walked right past Darren. They stopped directly in front of Jamal. Jamal froze. The paper coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of hot liquid onto the pristine marble floor. His eyes darted nervously between the two towering federal agents. Are you Jamal Harrison, owner and primary operator of Jamal Real Estate Holdings, LLC? The lead agent asked, his tone completely devoid of warmth. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just offered a weak, terrified nod. The second agent reached into his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a massive 2-inch thick stack of legal documents bound by a thick rubber band. He pressed the heavy stack of papers directly into Jamal's chest, forcing the real estate broker to take them or let them fall to the floor. You are being served with a federal subpoena for comprehensive financial records, the lead agent announced loudly, ensuring every single word echoed clearly across the quiet lobby. Your real estate brokerage, your escrow accounts, and all affiliated personal assets are currently under active federal investigation for wire fraud, bank fraud, and the misappropriation of federal Paycheck Protection Program relief funds. You are ordered to surrender all servers' hard drives and physical ledgers to the federal courthouse by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Do not attempt to destroy any documents, or you will be immediately remanded into federal custody. Darren's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from his face. He stared at the thick stack of federal documents in Jamal's trembling hands. The entire illusion of their untouchable wealth and power was evaporating right in front of his eyes. Jamal was hyperventilating. He looked down at the massive subpoena, his eyes frantically scanning the dense legal text on the cover page. He was looking for a way out, looking for a loophole, looking for the name of the government official who was tearing his life apart. His eyes landed on the bottom of the first page. There, printed in bold, undeniable black ink under the heading of lead financial investigator appointed by the Department of Justice, was a single name. Jamal stopped breathing. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like he had just seen a ghost. He bypassed the federal agents. He bypassed Darren. He looked directly across the lobby at me. I stood there in my tailored navy suit, perfectly calm, holding my designer handbag. I did not gloat. I did not sneer. I just tilted my head slightly and offered him a very small, very cold smile. Darren looked at Jamal's terrified face, then looked down at the paperwork. He read the name, Charmaine Brooks. Darren stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the marble pillar behind him. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that singular, glorious moment, the truth finally crushed the last remaining ounce of his ego. He finally realized his wife did not work at a strip mall, and he realized the woman he had thrown out of his house was the exact same woman who was coming to take everything he had ever owned. Jamal did not tell Tasha about the subpoena. He was too cowardly to admit that his entire empire of lies was crumbling, and he knew his wife would absolutely lose her mind if she found out the federal government was seizing their assets. So he kept his mouth shut, packed a frantic overnight bag, and spent the next 3 days locked in his office, frantically trying to shred documents that my team had already digitized. Because Jamal stayed silent, Tasha remained completely oblivious to the massive federal hammer suspended directly over her head. In her delusional mind, she was still the untouchable luxury influencer. In fact, to prove to the city that Lux by Tasha was more successful than ever, she moved forward with hosting a massive, incredibly expensive charity gala that Saturday night. She had rented out the entire first floor of the city's modern art museum. She hired a 50-piece orchestra, ordered imported caviar, and commissioned a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of her boutique's logo. She paid for all of this extravagance using the very last remaining drops of the $500,000 forged mortgage loan. She was literally throwing a party with stolen money on the eve of her own destruction. Darren, still reeling from the hotel lobby incident but desperate to maintain his facade of control, decided the gala was the perfect opportunity to publicly rebrand himself. He wanted everyone to think he had effortlessly moved on from his bitter, estranged wife. The museum was glowing with brilliant spotlights sweeping across the night sky when my hired chauffeur pulled my black town car up to the red carpet. I stepped out into the flashing bulbs of local society photographers. I was not wearing a simple business suit tonight. I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that cascaded perfectly down to the floor, paired with genuine diamond drop earrings. I looked like money. Not the loud, flashy borrowed money that Tasha and Darren constantly flaunted, but quiet, absolute generational wealth. I walked confidently up the marble steps toward the grand entrance. A burly private security guard in a black suit immediately stepped into my path holding up a clipboard. "Excuse me, ma'am," the guard said, looking at me with a hard expression. "The event organizers gave me strict instructions. Charmaine Brooks is explicitly banned from entering this venue. I am going to have to ask you to turn around and leave the premises immediately." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or cause a scene for the photographers. I simply opened my small velvet clutch and smoothly pulled out a heavy laser engraved metal lanyard. I slipped it over my neck and let the solid gold credential rest against my emerald gown. The guard looked down at the credential. The color instantly drained from his face. It was not a standard guest pass. It was a VIP Platinum sponsor badge. "I am not here as a standard guest," I informed the guard, my voice calm and pleasant. "I am the Platinum Table sponsor. I believe that tier grants me full access to the venue, the private VIP lounge, and the right to fire the security contractor if I am harassed at the door. Would you like to call the event coordinator to verify, or are you going to step aside?" The guard swallowed hard, immediately stepping back and holding the velvet rope open for me. "Have a wonderful evening, Ms. Brooks." Tasha and Darren had been so incredibly arrogant. When Darren threatened to cancel my credit cards, he completely forgot that I was the primary account holder on our premium travel rewards card. For 5 years, I had put every single one of our major household expenses, his business flights, and his luxury purchases on that exact card, meticulously paying it off from my own accounts to build the credit limit. I had accumulated over 2 million reward points. So when I saw the advertisement for Tasha's fake charity gala, I called the concierge service and bought the $20,000 platinum sponsor table entirely with reward points. I was literally attending her exclusive event for free, using the financial leverage Darren had completely ignored. I walked into the grand atrium of the museum. The room was packed with the city's elite sipping champagne under massive abstract paintings. It did not take long for people to notice me. Whispers started rippling through the crowd as I glided across the polished marble floor. I was supposed to be the disgraced broke wife hiding in shame. Instead, I was commanding the room. I spotted Darren almost immediately. He was standing near the open bar holding a glass of expensive scotch. Clinging tightly to his arm was a girl who looked like she had just graduated from college. She was wearing a cheap sequined dress that was far too short for a black tie gala. Darren was laughing loudly, introducing her to his colleagues with exaggerated enthusiasm. I walked directly toward them. Darren saw me approaching, and his arrogant laugh died instantly in his throat. He stiffened his eyes, darting nervously toward the VIP badge resting on my chest. "Hello, Darren," I said smoothly, stopping just a few feet away. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "You are not supposed to be here. Security was supposed to keep you out." I smiled warmly at the young girl clinging to his arm. She looked at me with wide, confused eyes. "Hi, I am Charmaine," I said, extending my hand to her. "I am Lexi." The girl squeaked nervously, shaking my hand. "Darren has told me so much about you." "Has he?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. "Did he tell you about the divorce? Because legally we are still very much married. In fact, we share a massive amount of debt. I hope he is treating you well, Lexi. Just make sure he doesn't ask you to co-sign any mortgages. He has a terrible habit of forging signatures when he runs out of cash." Lexi dropped my hand like it was on fire and took a large step away from Darren, looking at him with sudden horror. Darren's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. "You are insane," Darren spat, stepping toward me aggressively. "You think you can just crash my sister's event and ruin my future peace? You are nothing but a bitter woman who cannot let go." I looked Darren up and down, taking in his tailored tuxedo and his complete lack of self-awareness. "I let go a long time ago, Darren. I am just here for the catering. Enjoy your evening." I turned my back on him, leaving him frantically trying to whisper explanations to a very terrified Lexi. I scanned the massive room until I found my true target. Tasha was holding court at the absolute center of the room, standing between the towering ice sculpture and a massive multi-tiered chocolate fountain. She was wearing a sparkling silver gown holding a microphone. and laughing loudly with a group of local minor celebrities. She looked like she was on top of the world. I walked purposefully through the crowd, my emerald dress parting the sea of guests. I stepped right up to the edge of her inner circle. Tasha was in the middle of telling a fabricated story about her latest buying trip to Milan when she finally locked eyes with me. Her mouth snapped shut. The microphone dropped slightly in her hand. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "What the hell are you doing at my gala?" Tasha demanded, her voice echoing loudly through the microphone, causing the surrounding guests to fall dead silent. "Security. I need security over here right now. Remove this woman." I stepped right into her personal space, close enough to smell the heavy, expensive perfume she bought with my stolen equity. I did not scream. I did not grab the microphone. I simply leaned forward, maintaining perfect, elegant eye contact, and let my voice drop to a deadly, intimate whisper that only she and the people immediately next to us could hear. "I bought the platinum table, Tasha," I whispered calmly. "I figured I should come enjoy the imported caviar before the government freezes all of your bank accounts." Tasha scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You are delusional. My accounts are perfectly fine. My business is booming. You are just jealous because you will never have an ounce of my success." I tilted my head, offering her a look of profound, genuine pity. "Jamal did not tell you, did he? He was too scared to tell you the truth." "Tell me what?" Tasha snapped, her bravado faltering for a split second. Before I could answer, Tasha's designer clutch, which was resting on the cocktail table next to the chocolate fountain, began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID read, "Flagship Store Manager." Tasha glared at me, snatched the phone off the table, and pressed it to her ear. "What is it?" she demanded angrily. "I am in the middle of my gala." I stood perfectly still, watching her face, because I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of that phone line. I knew because I was the one who signed the final forensic audit authorizing the raid. The voice on the other end of the line was so loud and so hysterical that I could hear it clearly over the ambient noise of the ballroom. It was her store manager screaming in absolute, blind panic. "Tasha, you need to get down here right now. There are federal agents everywhere. They smashed the glass on the front doors. They have federal warrants. They are boxing up the registers and taking all the computers." Tasha's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. Her jaw went completely slack. "What are you talking about?" she whispered into the phone, her voice shaking violently. "Who is there?" "The IRS," the manager screamed, sobbing into the receiver. "The criminal division, Tasha. They are literally hauling the designer dresses out of the showroom in black garbage bags. They said the inventory is being seized for federal tax evasion and wire fraud. They are locking the doors. The boutique is gone." The heavy silver microphone slipped from Tasha's trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor with a deafening screech of feedback that ripped through the entire atrium. Every single guest in the museum stopped talking and turned to stare at her. Tasha looked at me. The arrogant, untouchable luxury influencer was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, broken woman who finally realized that her entire life was a criminal lie and the whole world was about to find out. She tried to take a step backward, away from me, away from the reality crashing down on her. Her high heel caught on the edge of the velvet carpet. Her eyes rolled back into her head. With a heavy, dramatic gasp, Tasha's knees completely buckled. She collapsed backward, her arms flailing wildly as she fell directly into the massive, multi-tiered chocolate fountain. Thick, warm, dark chocolate splashed violently in every direction, completely ruining her sparkling silver gown and splattering across the faces of the minor celebrities standing next to her. She lay slumped in the lower basin of the fountain, completely unconscious, as expensive liquid chocolate rained down over her perfect blonde hair. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. People screamed, photographers rushed forward, flashbulbs exploding like strobe lights as they captured the spectacular, humiliating downfall of the city's fakest millionaire. I did not flinch. I reached out, picked up a fresh strawberry from the catering table, and took a small, deliberate bite. The caviar was indeed excellent tonight. I left the museum while the paramedics were still trying to scrape hardened chocolate off Tasha's face and loaded her onto a stretcher. I did not stick around for the ensuing media circus or the chaotic aftermath of her ruined reputation. I had a much more important appointment scheduled for the very next morning. Darren had spent our entire marriage building his massive ego around that four-bedroom colonial house. He loved to remind me it was his property. He believed that holding the physical keys in his pocket meant he held all the power in our relationship. But as a forensic accountant, I knew a fundamental truth about wealth in America. Real estate does not actually belong to the person with the keys. It belongs entirely to the entity holding the financial paper. The subprime lender that Jamal had used to broker the fraudulent $500,000 second mortgage was in deep financial trouble. Because the federal government was actively investigating Jamal's entire network for wire fraud and the misappropriation of pandemic relief funds, the lender was absolutely panicking. They were terrified of a massive federal audit. They were desperate to quietly offload their toxic defaulted loans before the Department of Justice froze their corporate assets. They wanted the bad paper off their ledgers immediately, and they were willing to take a massive loss to make it happen. I did not walk into the sleek downtown offices of their commercial bank as Charmaine Brooks, the estranged, heartbroken wife. I walked into their high-rise boardroom as the lead representative and sole proprietor of a newly formed, fully anonymized private equity firm called Vanguard Asset Management. I had spent my weekend setting up the limited liability company, utilizing complex offshore registration firewalls and corporate blind trusts to make the true ownership of the firm completely untraceable. To the bank, I was just a ruthless corporate liquidator looking to buy distressed debt for pennies on the dollar. I sat across the polished mahogany table from the nervous vice president of the subprime lending firm. He was sweating through his expensive suit, frantically shuffling through a massive stack of defaulted residential files on his desk. Right in the middle of that stack was the heavy folder containing the fraudulent mortgage for Darren's beloved house. The loan was severely delinquent. Darren had not made a single payment in 90 days. The vice president just saw a massive liability. I slid a certified corporate cashier's check across the table. I offered to buy a large bundle of their absolute worst-performing residential debt, specifically including Darren's property address, for exactly 20 cents on the dollar. The vice president was so eager to wash his hands of Jamal's toxic portfolio that he barely even verified the property addresses. He just saw a financial lifeline to save his own career. He signed the transfer agreements and the assignment of mortgage documents without a second thought. The moment his heavy fountain pen left the paper, the entire legal and financial paradigm of my marriage completely shifted. I did not just own half the deed to the property anymore. My anonymous corporation was now the sole legal owner of the massive debt attached to the house. Because the loan had been originally secured through fraudulent means with a forged signature and an illegal notary stamp, and because the account was already way past the 90-day default window, the strict terms of the promissory note allowed for an immediate expedited hostile foreclosure. There was no mandatory grace period. There was no requirement for mediation. The note was called due in full immediately. My aggressive real estate legal team marched straight down to the county courthouse on Tuesday morning. We bypassed the standard clerks and presented the newly acquired paper directly to the presiding commercial property judge. We also presented undeniable hard evidence of the forged signature and the fraudulent notary stamp provided by Yvonne. The judge took one look at the overwhelming evidence of federal mortgage fraud and did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately struck Darren's name from the protective stay and signed the emergency writ of possession. Vanguard Asset Management was officially granted full, immediate, and uncontested legal ownership of the property to satisfy the defaulted debt. I was no longer just the discarded wife that Darren had so arrogantly thrown out of his house. I was literally the bank. I owned the walls, the roof, the custom hardwood floors he loved to brag about, the expensive landscaping, and the very ground the house stood on. I owned his sanctuary. While I was executing the absolute greatest financial checkmate of my entire career, Darren remained completely and utterly oblivious. He was far too busy dealing with the catastrophic fallout of his sister's spectacular public collapse at the museum. Tasha's luxury boutique had been officially boarded up by federal agents with bright yellow warning tape, Her corporate and personal bank accounts were completely frozen by the Internal Revenue Service. Jamal was still hiding like a coward in his locked office, frantically dodging calls from his own expensive defense lawyers and refusing to come home. Darren felt his perfect wealthy family slipping into absolute chaos, so he retreated to the only place that still made him feel powerful and in control: his house. On Wednesday evening, I was sitting in my luxurious hotel suite, sipping a glass of sparkling water and finalizing the logistics for the next morning when my personal phone chimed loudly on the glass table. It was a text message from Darren. He had sent a picture. It was a high-resolution selfie of him sitting on our extremely expensive Italian leather sofa in the center of the living room. He had a crystal glass of expensive bourbon in one hand, and his feet were propped up disrespectfully on the imported mahogany coffee table. He looked incredibly smug, defiant, and completely comfortable in his domain. He thought he had weathered the storm. He thought Tasha's problems had nothing to do with him. Beneath the arrogant photograph was a long, cruel text message. "I am sitting in my living room," Darren wrote, "looking at the empty spaces where your cheap things used to be. My lawyer just called and confirmed that the family court judge is going to grant the expedited divorce tomorrow morning because you stubbornly refused to sign the settlement agreement. You thought you could intimidate my family with your little accounting job, but you failed. You are going to get absolutely nothing from me. I am keeping the house, the luxury cars, and the investment accounts. You will never step foot on my property again. You lose, Charmaine. Enjoy living out of a suitcase in your cheap hotel room." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading his arrogant words over and over again. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel the urge to cry, scream, or throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I felt a deep, profound, and absolute sense of peace settling into my bones. He genuinely believed he had won the game. He had absolutely no idea that the game board had been completely flipped days ago. I took a quick screenshot of his photo and his threatening message. I opened my secure email application and attached the screenshot to an ongoing thread with the County Sheriff's Civil Enforcement Division. I confirmed the final execution of the judicial lockout order, which was strictly scheduled for exactly 8 o'clock the very next morning. I authorized the immediate use of a licensed commercial locksmith to drill the front door deadbolts if the current occupant refused to surrender the premises peacefully. Then I closed my email and opened the text message thread with my soon-to-be ex-husband one last time. I did not write a long paragraph defending myself. I did not argue about the upcoming divorce hearing or his delusional threats. I did not mention the bank, the anonymous holding company, or the forged mortgage documents his mother had illegally stamped. I typed exactly one short sentence, hit send, and turned my phone completely off for the night. Make sure you pack your golf clubs. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp, brilliant sunrise that felt like a personal victory. While I was drinking a perfectly brewed espresso in my hotel suite, Darren was desperately trying to hold the crumbling pieces of his fake empire together. After the catastrophic events at the museum, Tasha had been utterly humiliated, her boutique boarded up, and her reputation destroyed. To distract his hysterical sister and soothe his panicking mother, Darren had taken them both out to a lavish, expensive breakfast at an upscale country club cafe. He spent the entire morning loudly celebrating his impending divorce hearing, bragging over mimosas about how the judge was going to award him the house and leave me with absolutely nothing. He was desperately clinging to his delusion of control, but that delusion violently shattered the moment his luxury sedan turned the corner onto our quiet, affluent suburban street. Darren hit the brakes so hard the tires screeched against the asphalt. He stared through the windshield in absolute disbelief. The long, manicured driveway leading up to his beloved four-bedroom colonial was completely blocked. A massive commercial moving truck was parked at a sharp angle, its heavy metal ramp already lowered onto the pristine front lawn. Two men in thick canvas work jackets were carrying Darren's custom leather armchair out the front door and casually loading it into the back of the truck. But that was not what made Darren's blood run cold. Parked directly behind the moving truck with their red and blue lights flashing brightly in the morning sun were two marked county sheriff squad cars. Darren threw his car into park, leaving the engine running, and threw his door open. He marched up the driveway, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and absolute rage. Yvonne and Tasha scrambled out of the passenger seats, trailing closely behind him, their high heels clicking frantically against the pavement. Hey, Darren screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Put that chair down right now. What the hell do you think you are doing? Get off my property immediately, or I am calling the cops. The two movers did not even flinch. They gently placed the armchair in the truck, completely ignoring his tantrum. From the shadow of his wide front porch, a tall, broad-shouldered county sheriff stepped out. He was wearing his full tactical uniform, his thumbs resting casually on his utility belt. He looked at Darren with the exhausted, unimpressed expression of a man who dealt with arrogant, entitled people every single day. "There is no need to call the cops, sir," the sheriff said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We are already here. Are you Darren Brooks?" "Yes, I am Darren Brooks," he yelled, pointing aggressively at the house. "And this is my house. These men are trespassing and stealing my furniture. I want them arrested right now. My lawyer is going to have a field day with your department." The sheriff let out a slow, heavy sigh. He walked down the porch steps, pulling a thick metal clipboard from under his arm. He stopped right in front of Darren and shoved the clipboard directly into his chest. "I highly suggest you lower your voice and step back," the sheriff warned, his tone instantly hardening. "You do not own this property anymore, son." The bank called the note due. The property was legally foreclosed on yesterday afternoon and acquired by the primary lien holder. A judge signed the emergency writ of possession. This is a court-ordered eviction and property lockout. Darren stared at the clipboard. His brain simply could not process the words. Foreclosed. Acquired. Eviction. These were words that happened to poor people, to irresponsible people, to the people Darren looked down on. They were not words that applied to him. "That is a complete lie," Darren stammered, his arrogant bravado cracking entirely. "I pay my mortgage. I have lived here for 5 years. My name is on the original deed. You cannot just come and take my house without any warning. This is an illegal seizure. I am calling the mayor. I am calling the bank." "You can call whoever you want, but you need to do it from the sidewalk," the sheriff replied coldly, tapping the clipboard with his thick index finger. The new legal owner of the estate requested an expedited clearing of the premises. "You and your family have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal clothing and hygiene items before my deputies physically remove you from the property grounds." Darren opened his mouth to scream another threat, but the words died in his throat. A sleek, midnight black town car turned smoothly into the driveway, rolling to a stop just behind the flashing squad cars. The tinted back windows slowly rolled down. Darren, Tasha, and Yvonne all turned their heads, their eyes wide with confusion. The rear passenger door opened and I stepped out onto the pavement. I was dressed for a complete corporate takeover. I wore a tailored, stark white designer pantsuit, my hair perfectly styled and dark, oversized sunglasses resting on my face. I looked immaculate, unbothered, and entirely in control. In my right hand, I held a thick manila folder containing the freshly stamped, heavily certified deed to the property. Darren took a step backward, his mouth hanging open. He looked at me, then at the moving truck, and then back at me. His mind was violently short-circuiting. "Actually, officer," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the crisp morning air as I walked up the driveway toward them. "He is right. It is someone's property. Mine." I stopped right next to the sheriff and handed him the manila folder. He opened it, reviewed the judge's signature with a quick nod, and handed it back to me with a respectful tip of his hat. "Morning, ma'am," the sheriff said. "The perimeter is secure and the locks have already been changed. The movers are clearing the requested items now." "Thank you, Sheriff," I replied smoothly. Darren looked like he was going to vomit. His hands were shaking uncontrollably at his sides. "What are you doing here?" he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "How did you get my foreclosure notice? You have no right to be here." "It is not your foreclosure notice, Darren," I said, taking off my sunglasses and looking him dead in the eyes. "I bought the debt. Vanguard Asset Management is a private equity holding company that I registered and fully control. When you failed to make your payments on that massive secret second mortgage, your shady subprime lender panicked. They sold the bad debt to me for pennies on the dollar. I called the loan due. I foreclosed on you. This house legally belongs to me now." Yvonne pushed her way past Darren. Her face was contorted with a mixture of absolute fury and sheer terror. She was clutching her designer purse so tightly her knuckles were completely white. "You are a liar!" Yvonne shrieked, her voice cracking in hysterics. "You are nothing but a ghetto girl from the projects. You do not have the money to buy a $1.2 million estate. You are playing some kind of sick illegal trick. Darren, call the lawyers right now. She is committing fraud." I looked at Yvonne. I did not flinch at her racist, classist insult. I simply reached into the manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper encased in a clear plastic protective sleeve. I held it up so the bright morning sunlight illuminated every single drop of ink on the page. It was the spousal consent form for the $500,000 second mortgage. I stepped right up to Yvonne. "Fraud is an incredibly serious accusation, Yvonne," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "Let us talk about fraud. Because this document is the only reason the bank approved the massive loan that Darren used to secretly bail out your daughter's fake boutique." I tapped the bottom right corner of the paper with my manicured fingernail, right next to my forged signature. "Take a very close look at this," I demanded, forcing Yvonne to look at her own official blue seal. "This is your registered notary stamp. You knowingly stamped a fraudulent federal banking document to help your son steal $500,000 of my equity. Did you really think you could forge a federal auditor's signature and get away with it?" Yvonne let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She stumbled backward, bumping into Tasha, who was already sobbing quietly, completely broken from the events of the previous night. Darren finally understood. The absolute crushing weight of the reality collapsed directly onto his shoulders. He was not just losing the divorce. He was not just losing his precious house. He had committed a severe federal felony, and his own mother was a documented co-conspirator. He looked at the sheriff, who was now staring at him with a very different, highly suspicious expression. "You set us up," Darren whispered, tears of pure defeat finally welling up in his eyes. "You planned all of this." "I did not set you up, Darren," I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. "I just let you build your own trap, and then I locked the door behind you." I turned my back on them and looked at the movers carrying his expensive golf clubs out of the front door. I checked my watch. "You have exactly 8 minutes left to get your clothes," I announced loudly without looking back. "And I suggest you pack a few warm sweaters. Federal holding cells get incredibly cold at night." I did not even have to wait the full 8 minutes. Just as the words left my mouth, the deep rumbling sound of heavy engines echoed down the quiet suburban street. Darren, still frozen in absolute shock on the driveway, slowly turned his head toward the noise. 3 unmarked midnight black SUVs turned the corner in tight formation. They did not slow down to admire the manicured lawns. They accelerated aggressively, tires gripping the asphalt, and pulled up directly behind my parked town car, completely blocking any possible exit from the estate. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. A dozen men and women wearing tactical gear and dark windbreakers stepped out onto the pavement. Emblazoned across their backs in bold, bright yellow lettering were the initials IRSC, ID, and FBI. The morning air, which had previously been filled with the chirping of suburban birds and the hum of the moving truck, suddenly grew thick with an undeniable suffocating tension. This was not a local police dispute anymore. This was a full-scale federal sweep. Darren stumbled backward, his expensive leather loafers scraping against the concrete. His eyes darted wildly from the federal agents to me, his brain completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of the nightmare unfolding on his front lawn. He had spent his entire life believing that his money, his tailored suits, and his arrogant attitude made him untouchable. Now, he was watching the highest levels of federal law enforcement descend upon his property, and he was absolutely powerless to stop them. Jamal, however, recognized the imminent danger immediately. He had spent the last 3 days hiding in his office, shredding documents, and terrified of the subpoena he received at the hotel. Seeing the federal raid team pulling up to the house was the final trigger for his cowardice. While Darren stood paralyzed and Yvonne began to hyperventilate, Jamal slowly took a step backward. He slipped behind Tasha, using his wife as a human shield, and began to edge his way toward the tall wooden fence that separated the driveway from the backyard. Jamal thought he was being stealthy. He thought the agents were focused entirely on Darren, but federal task forces do not execute residential raids without securing the perimeter first. Just as Jamal turned his back and made a desperate, panicked sprint toward the side gate, a commanding voice ripped through the air. "Federal agents do not move." Jamal did not listen. He grabbed the iron latch of the wooden gate, his heavy breathing audible across the yard. He yanked the gate open, completely desperate to escape the consequences of his fraudulent empire. But before he could even take a single step into the backyard, two massive tactical agents rounded the corner of the house from the opposite direction. They had already flanked the property. Jamal tried to pivot and run the other way, but his tight, expensive suit restricted his movement. The lead agent closed the distance in 3 long strides, lowered his shoulder, and hit Jamal with the force of a freight train. Jamal flew backward, his feet completely leaving the ground. He crashed violently onto the perfectly manicured green grass of my front lawn. The heavy thud of his body hitting the ground was followed immediately by the sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists. Jamal Harrison, the agent, barked, pressing his knee firmly into the middle of Jamal's back to keep him pinned to the dirt. "You are under arrest by order of the Department of Justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Jamal thrashed against the grass, his face completely pressed into the mud, his cheap designer watch digging into his wrist. "I did not do it," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "It was not just me. Darren knew about the loans. He co-signed the flips. You have to listen to me. I will cooperate. I will tell you everything you want to know." The agent hauled Jamal to his feet, completely ignoring his pathetic immediate betrayal of his brother-in-law. "You are being charged with 32 counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and the federal misappropriation of $3.5 million in Paycheck Protection Program funds," the agent stated calmly, listing the charges like he was reading a grocery list. "You are also being charged as the primary broker in a fraudulent secondary mortgage scheme. Walk to the vehicle." Tasha watched her husband get dragged across the lawn in handcuffs. The shock finally shattered her fragile, delusional reality. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that forced the local sheriff standing nearby to actually wince and cover his ear. "Darren, do something!" Tasha shrieked, sprinting over to her brother and violently shaking his arm. "Call your lawyer, call someone. They cannot just take him like this. We are wealthy, we are respectable people. Tell them they have the wrong person." Darren just stared at her with hollow, empty eyes. He had no lawyers left to call. His accounts were empty, his house was gone, and he knew he was deeply implicated in the exact same mortgage fraud they were arresting Jamal for. He slowly pulled his arm away from his sister's grasp, completely defeated. Tasha turned around, desperately looking for someone to save her. She looked at the lead female IRS agent who was calmly walking up the driveway holding a second stack of legal documents. "You have to let him go!" Tasha cried, marching up to the agent with a false sense of entitled authority. "My husband is a legitimate real estate broker. I own a luxury fashion boutique. We are public figures in this city. This is massive harassment, and I am going to sue your entire department." The female agent stopped directly in front of Tasha, her expression completely stoic. "Are you Tasha Harrison, registered owner and primary operator of Lux by Tasha?" "Yes, I am," Tasha snapped proudly, tossing her hair over her shoulder, genuinely believing her fake influencer status held weight with federal law enforcement. The agent reached to her duty belt, unclipped a second pair of steel handcuffs, and grabbed Tasha's wrist with an iron grip. "Tasha Harrison, you are also under federal arrest." Tasha shrieked, trying to pull her arm away. But the agent smoothly twisted her wrist behind her back and snapped the cold steel into place. "What are you doing?" Tasha sobbed, completely losing her balance and stumbling forward. "I did not do anything. I just sell clothes. I do not know anything about Jamal's real estate business. You cannot arrest me for his mistakes." "You are not being arrested for his mistakes, Mrs. Harrison," the agent replied, securing the second cuff and grabbing Tasha by the bicep. You are being formally charged as an active co-conspirator in a massive money laundering operation. Forensic financial audits confirm you willfully accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen federal funds and fraudulent mortgage equity into your business accounts. You used those stolen funds to purchase commercial inventory and maintain a fraudulent lifestyle. You have the right to an attorney. I highly suggest you use it. No. Tasha wailed, the reality of federal prison finally breaking through her absolute delusion. Mom, Darren, do not let them take me, please. My brand, my followers. What about my store? Your store is currently being seized and liquidated to pay back the American taxpayers, the agent stated, flatly dragging a hysterically sobbing Tasha toward the second black SUV. Watch your head getting into the vehicle. I stood near the porch watching the complete and utter destruction of the people who had spent 5 years trying to make me feel worthless. The loud, arrogant family that had publicly humiliated me at the country club was now crying and begging in the dirt of my front yard. It was a spectacular, absolute collapse. But the sweep was not over yet. Yvonne had been standing near the front door, watching her daughter and her son-in-law get shoved into the back of federal vehicles. The older woman, who had always carried herself with such vicious, unearned superiority, suddenly looked incredibly small and frail. She realized she was the only one left who had actively participated in the fraud. She looked at the agents swarming the yard. Then she looked at me. Yvonne's knees buckled. The heavy, suffocating pride she wore like armor completely evaporated. She collapsed onto the hard concrete of the driveway, her expensive skirt tearing against the rough surface. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, tears streaming down her deeply lined face, her heavy pearl necklace swinging wildly from her neck. She stopped right at the tips of my pristine white designer shoes. She looked up at me, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her chest in a desperate pose of prayer. Please, Charmaine, Yvonne begged, her voice a ragged, pathetic wheeze. Please, I am begging you. Call them off. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I am an old woman. I cannot go to prison. I will not survive it. I will. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. I did not call them Yvonne. The evidence called them. We are family. Charmaine. Yvonne sobbed loudly, reaching out with a trembling hand to grab the hem of my white pantsuit. I quickly stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. We are family. I know we had our differences, but I am a woman of God. I go to church every Sunday. I sing in the choir. You know my heart. I only stamped those papers because Darren said it was an emergency. He said you agreed to it, but were just out of town. I was just trying to help my son. Please do not let them take my notary stamp. Do not let them put me in a jail cell. Have mercy on me. I stared down at the woman who had mocked my upbringing, who had called me a ghetto girl, who had actively conspired to steal my home and my life savings, so her spoiled daughter could buy expensive purses. She was invoking religion and family. Only when she was finally backed into a corner, she could not bully her way out of. I tilted my head, looking at her with a chilling absolute calm. God forgives Yvonne. The IRS does not. I turned my back on her just as 2 federal agents stepped onto the driveway, pulling her up by her arms and reading her Miranda rights. I did not stay to watch them put her in the back of the SUV. I walked past Darren, who was sitting on the curb with his head buried in his hands, completely broken. I walked up the steps of my newly reclaimed house, pulled out the shiny new key the locksmith had just given me, and unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. I stepped over the threshold into the grand foyer. The air inside the house already felt lighter, completely cleansed of their toxic, arrogant presence. I closed the heavy front door firmly behind me, the loud click of the deadbolt locking out the chaos, the screaming, and the flashing police lights. The house was finally quiet, and for the first time in 5 long years, it was truly entirely mine alone. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, I walked through the heavy oak double doors of the county family courthouse. I had changed out of my white suit from the morning and was now wearing a sharp, tailored black dress that projected absolute, unyielding authority. Walking beside me was my attorney. A ruthless woman named Evelyn, who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every single penny. The sterile, fluorescent lit hallways of the courthouse were a sharp contrast to the chaotic flashing police lights on my front lawn just a few hours prior. I felt perfectly calm. The trap had been fully sprung, but the final fatal blow had yet to be delivered. We took our seats at the petitioner table inside courtroom 4. 10 minutes passed. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense man named Honorable Judge Davies, was already reviewing the case file on his elevated bench. Suddenly, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. Darren stumbled inside. He looked absolutely terrible. The arrogant, perfectly groomed regional director from the country club was completely gone. He was still wearing the same clothes from the morning eviction, but his shirt was entirely wrinkled. His tie was loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck, and his face was slick with a heavy layer of panicked sweat. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting frantically around the room. Following closely behind him was his expensive divorce attorney, who looked incredibly frazzled and was aggressively whispering instructions into Darren's ear. Darren took his seat at the respondent table, his hands shaking so violently he had to fold them tightly together just to keep them still. I glanced toward the back of the courtroom. Sitting perfectly still in the very last row of the wooden gallery benches was Lexi. The 22-year-old girl Darren had paraded around the charity gala just nights before was wearing a modest beige sweater, clutching her small purse to her chest. Darren had clearly brought her here as a twisted power move, wanting his new girlfriend to watch him completely destroy his estranged wife in court. He had expected to walk out of this room as a wealthy single man with a massive house and zero financial obligations. Judge Davies struck his wooden gavel once, the sharp crack echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Let us proceed," Judge Davies announced, his voice carrying a heavy, impatient weight. "We are here for the finalized asset division and expedited dissolution of marriage for the Brooks estate. I have reviewed the initial filings, but I see an emergency supplemental packet was submitted by the petitioner this morning." Darren's lawyer immediately jumped to his feet, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Your Honor, we strongly object to this last-minute supplemental packet. In fact, we are requesting an emergency continuance. My client has been the victim of a highly coordinated malicious financial attack this morning. The petitioner, Ms. Brooks, secretly purchased the secondary mortgage on my client's primary residence through a shell corporation called Vanguard Asset Management and executed a hostile, unannounced eviction today." The lawyer puffed his chest out, trying to regain some semblance of control over the spiraling situation. "Furthermore, Your Honor, since Ms. Brooks acquired this private equity firm and its subsequent assets during the legal timeframe of the marriage, we officially demand that Vanguard Asset Management be immediately classified as community property. My client is legally entitled to exactly 50% of that LLC, 50% of the foreclosed house, and permanent spousal support." I did not react. I simply turned my head and looked at Darren. He was staring at the judge with a desperate, pleading expression, genuinely believing his lawyer had just found a miraculous legal loophole that would save his life. Judge Davies slowly lowered his reading glasses down the bridge of his nose. He looked at Darren's lawyer with an expression of profound, unadulterated disbelief. "Counselor," Judge Davies said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register, "did you actually read the supplemental packet that opposing counsel submitted to my clerk this morning before you stood up in my courtroom and made that demand?" Darren's lawyer swallowed hard, his confidence instantly wavering. "We have not had the opportunity to fully review the new documents, Your Honor. The events of this morning were highly chaotic." Judge Davies picked up a thick stack of papers from his desk. "Let me summarize it for you then. The packet contains certified, irrefutable evidence from the Federal Banking Registry. It proves that your client, Darren Brooks, took out a $500,000 secondary mortgage on the marital home exactly 3 months ago." The judge pulled out a single sheet of paper encased in a plastic sleeve. He held it up so everyone in the room could see the blue ink. "It also contains the official spousal consent form required for that massive loan." Judge Davies continued, his voice rising in volume and anger. "A document that contains a blatantly forged signature of the petitioner Charmaine Brooks, and to make matters worse, that forged signature was illegally notarized by your client's own mother, Yvonne Miller." who was arrested by federal agents on my client's front lawn less than 4 hours ago. The entire courtroom went dead silent. Darren let out a sharp, choked gasp, sinking so low in his wooden chair, he looked like he was trying to disappear into the floorboards. His lawyer stood completely frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open. He slowly turned his head to look at Darren, the realization hitting him that his own client had lied to him and dragged him blindly into a federal criminal conspiracy. "You want to claim half of her LLC?" Judge Davies asked, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "Your client committed egregious premeditated federal wire fraud to deliberately siphon $500,000 of equity out of the marital estate without his wife's knowledge. He used a forged document to hide marital assets and fund a third-party commercial business. In the state of family law, we call that the malicious dissipation of marital assets." The judge slammed the papers back down onto his heavy wooden desk. When a spouse commits deliberate financial fraud to hide, steal, or destroy marital property, they completely forfeit their right to an equitable 50-50 split of the remaining estate. The court's primary duty in this scenario is absolute restitution for the victim. Judge Davies picked up his pen. His eyes locked furiously onto Darren. "Mr. Brooks, you came into this courtroom demanding everything. You demanded the house, the cars, and the complete financial ruin of your wife. Instead, I am ruling in full favor of the petitioner. Due to your documented financial crimes, I am awarding 100% of the remaining marital assets directly to Charmaine Brooks." Darren shot up from his chair, his hands slamming onto the table. "No, you cannot do that. That is my money. I worked for that." "Sit down and shut your mouth. Mr. Brooks, or I will hold you in criminal contempt and have the bailiff put you in handcuffs right now," Judge Davies roared, pointing a furious finger at him. "I am awarding her all the liquid cash in your joint accounts. I am awarding her full ownership of both luxury vehicles. And I am issuing a qualified domestic relations order, transferring 100% of your entire corporate retirement portfolio, your 401k, and your stock options directly to your wife, to compensate for the $500,000 you stole from her equity." Darren fell backward into his chair, his breathing rapid and shallow. The judge was completely stripping him down to the bone. "You are leaving this marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back and the fraudulent debt you illegally acquired," Judge Davies finalized, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Furthermore, I am forwarding this entire case file, including the forged notary documents, directly to the district attorney's office and the federal prosecutor handling your brother-in-law's indictment. You will be facing severe criminal charges by the end of the week. This divorce is granted. We are adjourned." The sharp crack of the wooden gavel echoed through the room like a gunshot. Darren sat paralyzed at the table. He had lost his wife, his house, his cars, his retirement, and his freedom in the span of exactly 6 hours. He had absolutely nothing left. In the heavy silence following the judge's ruling, a very distinct sound echoed from the back of the courtroom. The sharp, clear click of high heels standing up on the hardwood floor. Darren slowly turned his head. Lexi had stood up from the gallery bench. Her face was completely pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and absolute disgust. She had come to court expecting to be the new victorious woman on the arm of a wealthy, successful executive. Instead, she had just listened to a judge declare that the man she was dating was completely broke, millions of dollars in debt, and heading straight for federal prison. Lexi did not say a single word. She did not look at Darren with pity. She simply turned her back on him, pushed open the heavy wooden double doors of the courtroom, and quickly slipped out into the hallway. "Lexi," Darren croaked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Wait, Lexi." He scrambled up from his chair, knocking it over in his frantic panic. He ignored his lawyer, who was hastily packing his briefcase to distance himself from his radioactive client. Darren sprinted down the center aisle of the courtroom, pushing his way through the heavy swinging doors and bursting out into the brightly lit corridor. "Lexi," he screamed, his voice echoing loudly off the marble walls. "Please let me explain. I can fix this, I promise." But the long hallway was completely empty. The elevator doors at the far end of the corridor were just sliding shut. She was entirely gone, abandoning the sinking ship the exact second she realized there was no treasure left below the deck. Darren stood alone in the middle of the cold hallway, his chest heaving, his tie hanging completely undone. He slowly turned around just as the courtroom doors opened one final time. I walked out into the corridor, flanked by my powerful attorney. I was holding my designer handbag, my posture perfect, my expression completely serene. I looked at the man who had ordered me to apologize to his cruel sister or get out of his house. I looked at the man who thought my quiet career made me weak. Darren looked at me. The last remaining fragment of his massive ego finally shattered. His knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed right there in the middle of the courthouse hallway, falling heavily to his knees on the cold marble floor. He buried his face into his trembling hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he finally genuinely began to cry. I did not stop to comfort him. I did not offer him a single word of pity. I simply adjusted the strap of my bag and walked right past him, the sharp click of my heels echoing down the hallway like the steady, inevitable ticking of a clock. I left the courthouse and drove straight to the suburban neighborhood that used to be a battleground. I drove my G-Wagon through the familiar winding streets until I reached my property. I parked in the empty driveway, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment. The flashing police lights were long gone. The moving truck had departed hours ago. There was only the gentle rustle of the wind through the oak trees. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped inside. The house was completely silent. The movers had taken Darren's expensive leather furniture, his oversized television, and the ridiculous abstract art he had bought to impress his friends. The rooms were bare, echoing slightly, as my heels clicked across the hardwood floors. I walked into the massive kitchen. This was the room Yvonne had always claimed as her own territory during Sunday dinners. She used to stand right at the marble island, criticizing my cooking, my career, and my upbringing, while she seasoned her chicken. I walked past the island and stepped down into the sunken living room, stopping in front of the custom-built mahogany wet bar. This was Darren's shrine to his own ego. It was the exact spot where he used to pour top-shelf scotch for his fraternity brothers, laughing loudly while I sat quietly in the corner. I did not feel sad looking at these empty spaces. I felt an overwhelming urge to completely erase them. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of a premium commercial contractor I had worked with on a previous real estate audit. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed a demolition crew at my address first thing Monday morning. I told him I wanted the kitchen torn down completely to the wall studs. I wanted the custom wet bar smashed to pieces and hauled away in a dumpster. I wanted the dark, oppressive paint colors Yvonne had picked out, completely covered with bright, vibrant shades that reflected the sunlight. I was not just remodeling a house. I was performing a physical exorcism of their toxic energy. For the next 3 months, my life was a symphony of destruction and beautiful reconstruction. I woke up to the sound of sledgehammers tearing through drywall and circular saws cutting fresh timber. I watched as the heavy dark marble was carried out and replaced with sleek modern quartz. I breathed in the sharp, clean smell of fresh paint and sanded wood with every swing of the hammer. Another piece of Darren's arrogant legacy was permanently erased from my sanctuary. The renovations were finally completed on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late October. I was sitting on my brand new plush emerald green velvet sofa in the center of my sunlit living room. The air was perfectly still. I reached for the television remote and turned on the local afternoon news broadcast. I did not have to wait long. The lead story breaking across the screen featured a live shot of the federal courthouse downtown. The anchor's voice filled my pristine living room. Sentencing was handed down today for the local real estate fraud ring that siphoned millions of dollars in federal pandemic relief funds. The anchor announced, her tone grave and serious. The screen flashed to a courtroom sketch and then to actual footage of the defendants being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. Jamal Harrison, the primary architect of the massive wire fraud and money laundering scheme, was sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole, the anchor reported. Jamal looked absolutely unrecognizable in the footage. He was wearing a standard issue orange jumpsuit, his flashy suits and fake gold watches long gone. He looked terrified. His shoulders slumped in total defeat as federal marshals aggressively guided him into the back of a heavily armored transport van. He was going to spend the next decade of his life locked in a concrete cell. The broadcast immediately shifted to a photo of Tasha. It was not one of her heavily edited glamorous influencer selfies. It was her official federal mugshot. Her hair was flat, her face was completely devoid of makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Tasha Harrison, owner of the now liquidated Luxe by Tasha Boutique, was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security federal prison for her active role as a co-conspirator in the money laundering operation, the anchor continued. The judge noted her complete lack of remorse and her lavish spending of stolen taxpayer dollars as key factors in the strict sentencing. Her business assets have been entirely seized by the Internal Revenue Service to pay restitution. Then the screen showed a brief clip of Yvonne. She was walking out of a side door of the courthouse using a wooden cane, trying desperately to hide her face behind a large handbag. Yvonne Miller, a former municipal clerk and licensed notary, avoided active prison time due to her advanced age and failing health. However, she has been placed on strict federal house arrest for the next 5 years. Furthermore, her state pension has been officially revoked, and her notary license has been permanently stripped. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, feeling a profound sense of closure. Yvonne had lost the only things she truly cared about. Her prestigious standing in her church community was completely obliterated. She was a disgraced, convicted felon trapped inside her own home, stripped of her financial security and her false sense of moral superiority. The news broadcast did not mention Darren. His crimes regarding the forged residential mortgage were being handled quietly in a separate state prosecution wrapped up in the massive restitution orders from our divorce. But I knew exactly where Darren was because my legal team was actively garnishing his wages. Darren had lost his high-paying regional director job the very same day the federal subpoena hit the news. Corporate companies do not keep executives who are actively under investigation for fraud. With his assets stripped by the divorce judge and a massive legal debt hanging over his head to keep himself out of a prison cell, Darren was forced to take the only job that would hire him with a pending criminal record. The man who used to wear tailored tuxedos and brag about his wealth at country clubs was currently standing behind a plastic counter at the regional airport. He was working the graveyard shift at a budget car rental desk. He wore a cheap polyester uniform shirt with a name tag, dealing with angry travelers at 3 in the morning. And because of the judge's strict restitution order, exactly 60% of his meager paycheck was automatically legally transferred into my bank account every single Friday. I turned off the television. The silence in my beautiful sunlit living room was absolute perfection. The very next morning, I drove downtown to my actual office. I bypassed the decoy strip mall entirely. I parked in the secure underground garage of the glass skyscraper and took the private elevator up to the 45th floor. I walked into the lobby and the receptionist immediately smiled and told me that Richard Sterling was waiting for me. I walked down the long carpeted hallway and stepped into the managing partner's massive office. Richard was standing by his floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the sprawling city. He turned around when I entered, a rare, genuine smile crossing his stern face. "Have a seat." "Charmaine," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. I sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. "I watched the news yesterday," I said smoothly. "The federal prosecutors secured maximum sentencing across the board. The financial web was completely dismantled." Richard nodded, sitting down and resting his elbows on his desk. "Yes, they did. And the lead prosecutor personally called me this morning to commend the absolute flawless precision of your forensic audit. You handed them a bulletproof case on a silver platter. You tracked every single stolen dollar through a dozen shell companies and offshore accounts without missing a single decimal point. It was brilliant work." "Thank you, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly professional. "But that is not why I called you in here today," Richard continued, his eyes locking onto mine with intense focus. "Charmaine, you have been a senior auditor at this firm for 4 years. You have consistently outperformed every single metric we have. You possess a level of ruthless financial precision that I have rarely seen in my entire career. You do not back down. And you do not let emotion cloud your judgment." Richard reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. He slid it across the polished mahogany wood until it rested right in front of me. The executive board convened late last night, Richard said, his voice dropping to a serious, respectful register. We are officially offering you a position as a junior partner at the firm. You will have your own dedicated team of forensic analysts, profit-sharing equity in the corporation, and complete autonomy over which federal cases you choose to accept. I looked down at the leather folder. A partnership. It was the ultimate validation of the grueling, silent work I had done for years, while my ex-husband and his family mocked me. I opened the folder, picked up the expensive silver pen resting inside, and signed my name on the dotted line without a single moment of hesitation. Welcome to the partnership, Charmaine, Richard said, standing up and extending his hand. Your new office is ready for you. I shook his hand firmly, left his office, and walked down the executive hallway. I stopped in front of the massive double-glass doors at the very end of the corridor. The gold plaque mounted on the wall read, Charmaine Brooks, Junior Partner. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. It was a sprawling corner office. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire downtown skyline. The morning sun was pouring into the room, reflecting brilliantly off the polished executive desk and the modern leather furniture. It was a space designed for power, intellect, and absolute control. I walked slowly behind the massive desk, trailing my fingers along the smooth wood. I turned and looked out at the city spread out beneath me. I had survived the toxic isolation of my childhood. I had survived the humiliating public betrayal of my marriage. I had taken every single rock they threw at me and used them to build an unbreakable fortress as I stood there taking in the view. My newly assigned executive assistant knocked softly on the open glass door. Excuse me, Ms. Brooks, the assistant said warmly. These were just delivered to the front reception desk for you. She walked into the office holding a massive, breathtaking arrangement of 24 pristine white roses resting in an elegant crystal vase. She placed them carefully on the corner of my desk, offered a polite smile, and quietly exited the room. I looked at the beautiful flowers, slightly confused. I had not told anyone outside the firm about the promotion yet. I reached out and gently pulled the small, thick parchment card from the small envelope tucked between the lush green leaves. I opened the card. Written in sharp, elegant black ink was a single powerful sentence. To the woman who knows her worth, a friend. I stared at the mysterious signature for a long time. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I did not know exactly who had sent the roses, but as I looked out over the skyline from my corner office, I knew one thing with absolute, unshakable certainty. The heavy, suffocating dead weight of the past was permanently gone. My new, elevated life had just begun. And the view from the top was absolutely spectacular. Exactly 1 year passed since the night my life shattered and rebuilt itself into an empire. It was the exact anniversary of the disastrous party that ended my marriage. I found myself standing once again beneath the towering white columns of the Oak Ridge Country Club. But the circumstances of this evening were vastly different from the nightmare of the previous year. I was not there as a neglected wife trying to maintain the fragile illusion of a perfect suburban family. I was not wearing a white silk dress waiting to be ruined. Tonight, I was wearing a stunning custom-tailored crimson gown that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. The firm had rented out the entire country club, not just the grand ballroom, but the entire sprawling estate, closing it down to the general public for a private corporate event. They were hosting a massive celebration in honor of my official induction as a junior partner. Hundreds of elite financial professionals, federal prosecutors, and corporate executives filled the venue. The same jazz band that had abruptly stopped playing when Tasha threw her wine on me was now playing a vibrant, triumphant melody in the corner. Richard Sterling stood at the center of the room, raising a crystal flute of expensive champagne to give a glowing toast in my honor. He spoke about my relentless dedication, my unmatched forensic precision, and the massive federal fraud rings I had successfully dismantled over the past year. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. I smiled, raising my glass in return. I looked around the opulent room, taking in the glittering chandeliers and the faces of people who genuinely respected my intellect and my power. I had completely conquered the very space where I was once humiliated. By midnight, the celebration began to gracefully wind down. I said my final goodbyes to my colleagues, thanking them for their unwavering support, and began making my way toward the exit. I walked out through the heavy oak double doors and stepped into the cool, crisp night air. The lingering scent of pine and expensive cigar smoke floated on the evening breeze. I walked down the grand marble steps and approached the softly lit valet stand. A few other executives were waiting for their luxury vehicles. I reached into my velvet clutch, pulled out my premium valet ticket, and handed it to the attendant behind the wooden podium. He nodded respectfully and signaled for one of the drivers waiting in the shadows near the parking lot entrance. A man stepped out from the darkness and began walking toward the podium to retrieve my keys. He was wearing the standard-issue uniform of the country club staff, a white collared shirt, black slacks, and a cheap, bright red polyester vest. As he stepped under the warm glow of the overhead awning lights, my breath caught slightly in my throat. I recognized the slope of his shoulders. I recognized the way he walked, though the arrogant, powerful stride he once possessed was completely gone. Now he moved with a slow, heavy exhaustion, dragging his feet against the pavement, like a man carrying an invisible, crushing weight. It was Darren. My ex-husband had fallen further than I could have ever imagined. The severe wage garnishments, the massive legal debts, and the lingering shadow of the federal investigation had completely stripped him of his former life. He had lost his corporate executive position. He had clearly lost the graveyard shift job at the budget car rental desk. Now he was working for minimum wage plus tips, fetching cars for the wealthy elite at the exact same exclusive country club where he used to proudly boast that he was a top-tier member. Darren walked up to the podium and reached out to take the ticket from the attendant. As he turned to look at the name on the slip, his eyes slowly trailed upward. He froze. The small laminated ticket slipped from his trembling fingers and fluttered to the concrete. We stood less than 3 feet apart. His face was pale and deeply lined with intense stress. The expensive, meticulously styled haircut he used to maintain was gone, replaced by a ragged, uneven cut. The cheap red polyester vest hung loosely on his frame, highlighting how much weight he had lost over the past 12 months. His eyes met mine, and I saw a level of profound, soul-crushing shame that defied description. He was completely broken. Darren did not say a single word. He could not. He simply lowered his head, staring at the tips of his scuffed black work shoes, completely unable to meet my gaze. He bent down, picked up the ticket with a shaking hand, and quickly walked away to retrieve my car. I waited patiently on the curb. A few minutes later, the deep, powerful purr of my brand-new custom-ordered Mercedes Maybach echoed through the driveway. Darren pulled the luxurious vehicle to a smooth stop right in front of me. He stepped out of the driver's seat, carefully leaving the door open for me. He stood rigidly at attention by the front fender, his head still bowed, completely humiliated by the reality of serving the woman he had tried to destroy. I walked up to the open door. I stopped right next to him. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a crisp, folded $100 bill. I held the money out to him. Darren slowly raised his head. His eyes were bright with unshed tears of pure defeat. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the bill. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice perfectly calm, steady, and devoid of any pity. "You told me to apologize or get out of your house, Darren. I didn't apologize. And as it turns out, it was my house all along." I did not wait for a response. I stepped into the back of the Maybach, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. I gave my private driver the signal, and the massive vehicle glided effortlessly away from the curb, leaving Darren standing alone under the harsh awning lights, clutching the tip I had just given him. As the country club faded into the darkness behind me, I leaned back against the plush leather seats and looked out at the passing city lights. They will call you difficult when you demand respect. They will call you a black sheep when you refuse to play by their toxic rules. But the greatest revenge isn't screaming back at them. The greatest revenge is letting their own arrogance dig their graves while you quietly buy the cemetery. Know your worth, ladies, and always, always check the receipts. The bright city lights blurred into a beautiful glowing streak across the tinted window as the car drove smoothly into the night. My new life was waiting for me, and it was entirely mine. The greatest lesson from this journey is that true power never needs to shout. When toxic people try to diminish your worth, the best response isn't a screaming match. It is quiet, calculated elevation. Never let anyone else control your financial narrative or dictate your value. Toxic individuals will often mistake your silence for weakness, completely unaware that it is the precise focus you need to build your own empire. Let them be loud in their ignorance while you quietly secure your future. The ultimate revenge is removing their access to your light and watching them stumble in the dark. Hit the like button and subscribe if you are ready to claim your worth and let your success do all the talking.